Thanks so much for watching our show. We really appreciate the support. It costs a lot to produce, so we're asking for donations and pledges here on Patreon. Thanks again. Welcome to See It and Feel It with Dr. Brett, and I'm Dr. Brett, and today I'm here with Luigi Mondelli, who sounds like an Italian guy, and his father is Italian, but he's actually Brazilian, and he's a Jiu Jitsu master and instructor. Welcome, Luigi.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome, man. So tell us how you got started with Jiu Jitsu, and then we'll get into all kinds of stuff as we go here.
I think I was always into sports first and martial arts, and it took me a while until I could find myself, like doing something that I felt that I could progress and be good at. And my mom never put me in any martial arts because I was always a big kid, so she thought I was gonna become more aggressive when actually it's the opposite.
Totally.
Yeah, so I went on my own and I started doing other martial arts. I did a little bit of Shotokan, Kung Fu, Judo. But then when I was about 19 to 20 years old, I found Jiu Jitsu, which is kind of late a little bit. And then I never stopped since then.
That's
so I'm
awesome.
49. So
yeah, that's
going.
very cool. What was it about Jiu Jitsu that sort of like grabbed you in a way that the other martial arts didn't?
Well, I was fascinated by, first of all, the techniques, how efficient, they could be. Number two, I saw a really self-defense component, like any other martial arts, but I thought that was really practical. And because I'm 6'3" tall and, I always weighed around 220 pounds or so, it just felt natural for me to be able to fight on the ground. In the beginning, it was really a big struggle because as a big guy, I didn't move that well. But I think it poses some challenges that made me overcome some, things. And I think it was just part of my maybe feeling that was good for my frame and my body,
You're 220. You said you're 6 feet or 6'3". I think I couldn't hear.
6'3". Now I'm 240.
Wow.
But when I started,
yeah, we're all.
I've been more
heavier,
and then I leaned out a little bit. But jiu-jitsu has been probably the most constant thing in my life for a long time.
And so there's a real distinction there around size for jiu-jitsu. Are you in the upper end of the range here for people that are generally drawn to your sport?
Actually, the beauty of jiu-jitsu that you end up seeing people from all different, body types. And my wife she's of course shorter. She's 5 feet tall, and for her, other types of techniques that I don't do it, but it works well for her. It really help her fight bigger people. For me, it's just I think the beauty it's how jiu-jitsu can be customized. Once you have the tools, so it's like having a huge toolbox and you start picking and choosing like which tools you're going to keep with yourself. And it's good to know that you have the whole toolbox in the back of your trunk, but right next to you have a few that you're going to use the most. So I think that's how I see jiu-jitsu as far as how it adapted. Yeah.
I love it. Now, is there any truth to like what we see constantly in like, TV shows and police dramas where the 5'2", 110-pound officer kicks some 6'3", 220-pound guy's ass? Is there validity to that? Can you learn enough techniques that a woman could actually do that? Or is that TV drama?
Well, I try to be very realistic. So depending on the environment, I'll give a quick example. There was one time, one guy, big guy, 6'3", 6'4", he showed up in my gym and he had a little bit of an attitude. He was more, maybe say arrogant, but he didn't have a proper instruction before he joined us. Long story short, one time he was grappling my wife and he didn't want to tap. Tap is our, the signal that we give to each other we had enough.
Once you're done.
Yeah, and then and she dominated him on the ground. The guy was a big guy, and of course she has a lot of experience. he didn't want to tap, so he almost hurt himself, and then you could see that it was really like, okay, a smaller person really can fight a bigger person. Granted that, the levels we have to have a disparity of levels where the smaller person knows way more than the bigger person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, they have to know significantly more, I would assume, for something like 80-pound differential, right?
Yeah, yeah, but
Yeah.
I see a great potential for sure. I think it's a great self-defense tool for women. But I always advise women and smaller people to think about different tools as well, not just jujitsu.
Yeah, and like what else besides jujitsu? What do you advise there?
Well, I think it's for anybody thinking about being well-rounded when it comes to self-defense is, well, you should know all the dimensions as far as like striking, have a good base of wrestling, maybe judo. So now
Hmm.
you know more hand-to-hand combat, but also have to maybe adopt the use of different, maybe a blade or a pepper spray or something like that when it comes to realistic self-defense scenarios.
Gotcha. And
You
what's
know,
the distinction between what are the main distinctions between jiu-jitsu and wrestling? Because not everybody knows the two sports well.
yeah, well, so we could put maybe both in the same category as far as like grappling. So it's
Mm,
both we could consider it as a grappling styles. Um, Jiu-jitsu was created, or Japanese jiu-jitsu. Everything started with Japanese jiu-jitsu, and then we have this variants that came after that. Um, Jiu-jitsu is pretty much a martial arts. It's a self-defense. It was created, like you said, where a smaller person could defeat a bigger person.
mm,
Um, right. So where wrestling stops, jiu-jitsu keep going. So for instance, there's no pinning in jiu-jitsu. There's no winning if you pin someone. In a
mm.
jiu-jitsu match, you have to keep going to achieve the better position or
Yeah,
control,
yeah,
and your ultimate goal is to submit people through choke holds or joint locks. In
right.
wrestling, it's an amazing tool. I see more as a sport, but it can be extremely efficient. um, but wrestling, in my opinion, has some deficiencies when it comes to a complete self-defense package, because people don't train to fight when they are on their backs.
Got
And
it. That
you
makes
know
sense.
so
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing. And then a lot of people are like, oh, but I'm never going to be on my back. I'm like, you cannot predict that in the fight. You know what I mean?
It's
So
so true.
yeah, you can trip and fall, somebody can take you down. So
Totally.
yeah, so
Yeah.
being
You know,
well-rounded. Yep. Go
yeah.
ahead.
You might not know it because but I'm an identical twin, right? So,
Oh, cool.
so I often say to people, you're looking at somebody who's had hundreds and hundreds of fights. Many, like even as an adult, we got into some really bad fist fights. And so I know what you're talking about just because so many times when you're fighting, like you slip. I remember one time I was in the desert with my twin brother and we were taking, I don't remember, like we had girlfriends and everything. And somehow we were like in our 30s or something. And we got into a fist fight and I was wearing cowboy boots and I slipped and my brother hits me on the side of the head. Well, what I mean, while I'm on the pavement, like literally that's
Wow.
what kind of, yeah, he was pretty cutthroat. Like in our 30s, my
Uh,
twin brother was Wall Street and very aggressive. And so,
oh,
but I've
wow.
spent so much time, like we did some form of wrestling our entire childhood, even though we didn't do it
Nice.
formally, the chokeholds and the headlocks and everything,
Yeah.
just because, as identical twins, it's so intense sometimes.
Probably it
So
was fun too.
fun and
Yeah.
not so fun, right? It's kind of a little
Yeah,
bit of
yeah,
both.
yeah,
Did you
yeah.
have brothers and sisters growing up? I mean,
I, I have
was
just
that
one.
part of,
I have just one sister, just 2 years older than me, but nobody in the
so,
family were into fighting.
oh, got it. So she didn't choke you out, and that's part of the reason you got into jujitsu?
No, no. We probably had like some heated arguments, but
Yeah.
never really got into anything physical.
And what kind of fighting have you done? Have you done tournaments and stuff in your past? And do you work with pros now? Tell us about your experiences.
So I was always, I well, let's put this way too. One of the reasons why I decided to do jujitsu was to maybe challenge myself, because I never saw myself as a competitive person. And in jiu-jitsu, you you cannot blame anybody else but yourself if you lose, you know, and if
No
you
one
win,
to no one to
no,
blame.
you're not like, no, my team let me down. There's no such thing like that. But I played basketball for a long time. And so it was the one way for me to take responsibility of my results, you know. So
Mm,
I started competing as soon as I started jiu-jitsu, and I competed a lot in big tournaments
wow,
and smaller tournaments, and some
wow.
I did well, some I didn't do well. um, I trained a lot, kind of no holds barred, like before MMA. But I had a corporate job in Brazil, so I couldn't really show up with the black eye and the crooked nose. And I got married really early in my first marriage, so I had to balance these responsibilities and passion. So jiu-jitsu was probably the least harmful type of fighting that I could engage without losing my job.
Yeah,
You know, so I compete a lot.
without losing your noodle either, right?
Oh,
Like,
absolutely. Yeah. I boxed a lot, and but just
um,
like smaller things,
yeah.
events. And yeah, now I work a lot with professionals, or usually I get kids starting, like kids, say young adults,
Mm.
and prepare them to become professionals. And we
And
have
how
managed to.
Yeah, and how do you deal with some of the dynamics of, like of the intensity? Some of the professionals might have, an underlying rage that fuels them, right? So how do you deal with stuff like that as you're going about training?
Well, one of the things I believe is that a fighter should not fight with any feelings involved. I don't know if it makes sense. Like, you shouldn't fight um,
Like
hating.
Tyson did, Tyson in his day fought with a rage.
Yeah, I think he had a lot to let it out, right, from his childhood and everything.
Yeah.
And I think at least he channeled part of that through his fighting career. So I tell my guys I try to work that confidence and assertiveness
Mm,
on when they are in the cage, or when they step on the ring. And I tell them to maybe try to empty their minds of any type of feelings, so
mm,
they can see it more as a job with the determination. I don't know if
mm.
I do this right, but I try not to pull much. I try to teach them to use violence of action, because you need to be violent to win in a way, but it's the right
Absolutely.
violence, you
Yeah.
know. So it's not a. I try not to use rage or anger as a fuel, but maybe I try to get them to establish goals
Mm.
and see each opponent as, okay, this guy is just on my way towards my goal. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So
totally.
eh,
Yeah, and what about the guy? What about the guy or the woman that actually is fueled that way? How do you handle that? Because you're teaching like determination and focus, right?
yep.
And how to channel that determination and focus, right, when they're fighting. But some people are actually fueled by an underlying, anger or rage. So
Hmm.
how do you handle that as you go about your process of teaching?
Well, I had that before, where fighters would train really, really well, but they had that thing that is almost like they need to punch something or someone. And so
Right.
legally they feel they can do that inside the ring. You know? And most of these guys that I saw didn't do that well,
Right.
because they didn't follow maybe a strategy. They were not so focused. They over excited, let's say, or
Yeah.
over or taken by that rage. So I try to bring them down a little bit
Yeah.
to again, and turn that, say, type of aggressiveness into more assertiveness. If I don't know if I'm saying that
Yeah.
word correctly because of my
Absolutely.
English.
No,
And
your English is perfect, dude.
yeah,
Fantastic. Yeah.
and that's what I try to focus the most, you know, visualization, establishing goals, um, seeing themselves where they want to be before the
Mm,
fight. I saw your podcast with Sean Mata, and you guys talking a
mm,
little. You asked him a little bit of what he does for before matches and etc.
mm,
So I think, like, throughout my career as a competitor, I try all different things to
mm.
um, bring some rage inside of me. So I would go, you know. So, and I didn't
So
do that well. I tried to calm myself down too much, and I didn't do too
Too
well.
well
So
either, right? You have to find
yeah,
that right balance, right?
so that's
So
what I try to teach them, to find the
yeah,
balance.
right. And take us through, for example, a visualization you might give a fighter that's about to step in the ring. What are they, walk us through one of your visualizations just out of curiosity.
So I try to use more personal anecdotes when I'm
Mm,
talking to them, because I try to explain how I feel and then see if that works for them. So, for instance, leading to any competition, uh, at least once a day, I try to see myself in many different scenarios, but always seeing coming out with the win. So I visualize myself dominating a situation. I see myself with my arms raised. I see myself maybe struggling on the bottom, say I'm getting pinned and finding the strength to get out of there.
mm,
And that's something that really helped me to cope better with losses.
mm.
Just feeling that I gave my all and all of that. So fighting up to the last second, not giving up, not surrendering, in a way. I tell them that every time when I get to the venue where I'm competing, my first stop is by the podium, and I try to see myself stepping on the first, step there as the winner. So I try to create this mental picture. So when I'm fighting, if I see myself in a not well situation, that visualization, that picture that I, create in my mind, help me to overcome, or at least like fight up to the last second. So I tell them to have short term, mid-term, and long term visualization and goals. So the short term is finishing, say, the first match that they have, the first bout that they have ahead, with the arms always raised. Midterm is like they hitting a good event, because that's part of, maybe getting a contract. And number three is like, okay, now I want you guys to visualize yourself rich, healthy, uh, right, successful, and with a good name, and still being yourselves and not getting lost within, the seducting part of the fame, power, and
Totally.
money.
Yeah,
you know.
totally. That's well
So that's
said.
how,
Very
yeah, so
cool.
that's what I try to do.
Yeah, so when as a sports psychologist, I do a lot of work with meditation, mindfulness, visualization, and breath work. We just, talked about the visualization piece. You walked us through it, makes a lot of sense. I can see all of that. Very cool. Tell us about like the other components here, like the breath. I would imagine it's like super important when someone's fighting, right? How to handle their breathing. Walk
Oh
us through
yeah.
the breathing components of dealing with fighters.
So usually, there's one thing I help them during the warm ups, and because I do that together with my wife. She's a competitor too. We do a lot of breathing exercises before our matches, in different paces, different techniques, let's say. And but the most important, what I tell my fighters, especially the grapplers, is to remain calm and try to be, like you said, mindful, as far as like, if they can catch themselves hearing and feeling how they are breathing,
Mm.
because it's really, I think, like, it's almost like in the spectrum of hardness when it comes to the fight. Well, one thing is when a big guy drops, his chest on top of me and it's constraining my breathing. So then that can start creating some panicking.
Panic, yeah, some fear for sure.
Yeah, fear, and then that constriction. So you start like with that type of shallow breathing, more thorax,
Totally.
chest. So, well, if I'm on the ground, I'm definitely going to try to move so I can have more, my rib cage is expanding, so I can take long breath. And then usually the breathing help us to, well, calm down in a moment and think more clearly. And it's almost like the same components when it comes to anxiety. You the doctor, way better than me. I don't want to sound like a fool here,
No,
but
you're
you know,
awesome. I love it. I mean, I'm Dr. Plenty. I'm really enjoying
no.
it.
So at least like myself, I always felt like, well, let's go back. It's like at some point in my life, when I was like 29 years old, I went through some anxiety issues because of a divorce and many other things. So I I got in contact with this really amazing therapist back in Brazil, and I started like going for some therapy to help me out. I almost quit jiu-jitsu because I thought I had to quit jiu-jitsu to reorganize my life. And actually, she made me do the opposite, to keep going to jiu-jitsu so I could reorganize my life.
Nice,
and
I like
and it
it.
really helped. But a lot of the anxiety, the techniques to help me with to be more present in the moment, to be more mindful in whatever I was engaging, was through breathing exercises, and just trying to, of course, expand more and have this kind of like belly breathing sort of, right?
Yeah,
This
totally.
long breath. So that's what I try to do during my matches, and that's what I try to tell my fighters is like, if you feel your breathing getting shorter and even more like chest involved, and you really need to get a hold of yourself and bring yourself to a, say, lower level of stress, so you can think more
Yeah, it
or
makes
think
total
better.
sense.
Yeah, and then that has to be like on the go, super quick.
I like it. Now, I watched, I don't randomly, I watched a little like video on Wilt Chamberlain. I don't even know why, but remember the famous basketball player that got 100 points in one game and
Yeah.
talks about having had sex with 20,000 women in this lifetime or whatever it is. But he talked about how driving cross country, he would just play with his breathing and he would get up to, now I'm not recommending this, but he got himself up to holding his breath for 5 minutes, at a time. He could hold it for 5 minutes just by practicing on his cross country drives,
Hmm.
to like, build that sort of ability or stamina. Do you do anything like that where you actually, I know there's a lot of techniques around, belly breathing and stuff, but what about that stamina of being able to hold the breath for a long time? Is it the opposite in fighting almost?
Well, we really don't want to hold our breath, but probably that's something that I should maybe think more about it, because it might help when you find yourself like not able to breathe correctly. There's some guys that don't even catch themselves, like they're fighting and they hold their breath, or even when they're going for submission, they just like tense up. And I tell the guys, no, take a one long, deep breath. And as you're choking the guy, you breathe out. You know what I mean? Like, but I don't know. I feel
I
like it
know
has a
I've
really
done
good
that with
effect.
my twin many times.
But I feel that it's just it does help. You know what I mean? But that's something that maybe I should look into it.
I was just curious, just because of like sometimes we're 150 yards here from the inlet, and I'm going to fish this afternoon. I think I mentioned that, right?
Uh huh.
I got some live shrimp. I can't wait. And
Nice.
when I'm alone, sometimes you know what I mean, and I'm just with the elements, and I'm going to be sitting out there at sunset tonight. I play with different breathing techniques just for fun, right? And
That's awesome.
sometimes you play, just building a little bit of capacity. When I swim in our pool, I like to go. It's so cold right now because I don't have it heated, but I just do laps underneath, right? And then I
Hmm.
like that feeling of holding it back and forth. I don't know what it builds, but it's just a sense that it you know what I mean, that there's some value in it. So I was just curious.
Yeah, I
Um,
never tried. I did swim a lot, which was one of the things I did to help my jujitsu because of the breathing as well too.
yeah,
Um, but that's something that definitely I should look into, see like how
and
maybe could help.
yeah, and tell us a little bit more about the mindfulness stuff because it's something I work on all the time, everywhere with all athletes. Thanks for watching See It and Feel It with Dr. Brett, and stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend.